the man who bought his redemption with dynamite. Imagine waking up one ordinary morning, having your coffee, opening the newspaper, and finding your own obituary. Not a typo, not a tasteless joke, your full name, your photograph, and a headline that shatters you. The merchant of death is dead. This happened to Alfred Nobel in April 1888. His brother Ludwig had died in France, but a confused journalist published Alfred's death, and in those printed lines, Nobel read what the world truly thought of him. They didn't remember the brilliant inventor. They didn't mention the frustrated poet or the solitary man who spoke 5 languages. They remembered only one thing, that he had created the most efficient way to eliminate human beings ever invented, dynamite. And in that moment, looking at the words that condemned him from beyond the grave, Alfred Nobel had a revelation that would change the course of history. Because it turns out that you don't get the chance to rewrite your own epitaph every day, of transforming your legacy, of turning destruction into hope. This is the story of a man who literally blew up the world, and then tried to heal it. The story of how guilt can build cathedrals, of how regret can become redemption. This is the story of Alfred Nobel, the most tormented millionaire who ever lived. To understand how one man ends up creating both the instrument of destruction and the world's symbol of peace, we have to go back to the beginning, to Stockholm, to the year 1833, to a house that was literally exploding. Alfred Nobel was born into a family intimately familiar with failure. His father, Emmanuel, was an inventor obsessed with explosives, a man whose factories had a habit of blowing up just when it seemed he was finally going to succeed. When Alfred was 4 years old, his father went completely bankrupt. The family fell into such deep poverty that Alfred's mother had to open a vegetable shop just so they could eat. But here's the fascinating thing. Even in utter destitution, Emmanuel Nobel never stopped dreaming of bigger explosions. And in 1842, that dream finally found a buyer. The Tsar of Russia needed underwater mines to defend St. Petersburg, and Emmanuel had just the right obsession. So the family moved to Russia, going from abject poverty to the halls of power almost overnight. For young Alfred, it was like being flung from one universe to another. Imagine, a sickly child, so frail that his mother feared each winter would be his last, suddenly surrounded by private tutors, gleaming laboratories, and the conversations of brilliant scientists. He was taught Russian, English, French, German, and Swedish. By 17, Alfred was a polyglot with a secret love for English poetry and a mind that functioned like a steel trap. But his father had other plans. Poetry doesn't build empires, he told him. Explosives doing so. Alfred was sent off to travel around Europe, Paris, New York. For 2 years, he absorbed chemical knowledge like a sponge. He studied with the best, and somewhere along that journey, something shifted within him. The poetry began to fade. The chemistry became poetry, especially the chemistry of one particular compound, nitroglycerin. This is where the story takes a dangerous turn. Nitroglycerin had been known since 1847. It was an oily liquid, transparent as water, that possessed an absolutely terrifying destructive power. The problem was that no one knew how to control it. It could explode from heat, from cold, from a sudden movement, from an intense gaze, or so it seemed. It was so unpredictable that transporting it was suicidal. Storing it was chemical Russian roulette. But Alfred saw something others didn't. He didn't see only destruction. He saw possibility. He saw mountains that could be moved, tunnels that could be drilled through the Alps, canals that could connect oceans. He saw the future of humanity. If only he could tame this liquid demon. His father thought he was crazy. That substance will kill someone in this family, he warned him. He was right. September 3rd, 1864, is a date Alfred Nobel would carry etched in his soul until the day he died. It was an ordinary afternoon in Helenaborg, a suburb of Stockholm. The Nobel family had returned to Sweden after his father's Russian Empire collapsed with the end of the Crimean War. Once again, starting from scratch. Once again, betting everything on explosives. Alfred had been working obsessively on ways to stabilize nitroglycerin. He had transformed a shed behind the family home into a laboratory. His neighbors complained constantly. "It's dangerous," they said. "It's going to kill us all," they warned. Alfred ignored them. He was so close, so incredibly close. That day, his younger brother Emil was in the shed. Emil was only 21, brilliant like all Nobel laureates, helping Alfred with a new batch of nitroglycerin. There were other workers there too. Just a normal day of experimentation. And then, without warning, without a reason anyone could identify afterward. The world went up in flames. The explosion was so violent it was felt miles away. The shed simply ceased to exist. No ruins remained, no walls, only a smoking crater and fragments of what had once been human beings scattered across the garden. Emile died instantly, along with 4 other men. Their bodies were so mangled that the pieces had to be gathered into baskets. Neighbors came running, shouting that they had always known that the Nobel laureates were mad, that they should be expelled from Stockholm. Alfred's father, Emmanuel, suffered a stroke that very night from the shock. He would be paralyzed for the rest of his life, unable to speak coherently, trapped in a broken body. Perhaps a physical reflection of what guilt can do to a man. Alfred's mother never spoke to him again. Literally, she never uttered another word to her son. The silent guilt in her eyes said it all. You killed your brother. And Alfred buried his brother. He listened to the accusations. He felt the weight of the horror. And then, he returned to the laboratory. I cannot bring Emile back, he wrote in his diary, but I can make his death mean something. I can make nitroglycerin safe. The Stockholm authorities forbade him from experimenting within the city limits, so Alfred moved his work to a barge in the middle of a lake. Alone, surrounded by the cold Swedish water, with his brother's ghost as his only companion, he continued his experiments. People thought he had gone mad. Perhaps they were right. But 3 years later, in 1867, Alfred Nobel did something that changed the world. He discovered that if he mixed nitroglycerin with diatomaceous earth, a porous and absorbent substance, he could create a stable paste. A paste you could mold, that you could transport, that you could store without it spontaneously exploding. And when you wanted it to explode, you could control exactly when and how. He called it dynamite, from the Greek dynamis, power, and it certainly had power. In barely a decade, Alfred Nobel became one of the richest men on the planet. Dynamite was exactly what the world was waiting for. Engineers loved it. With it, they drilled the Gotthard-Base tunnel through the Alps, connecting Italy and Switzerland. They opened the Corinth Canal in Greece. They excavated mines to impossible depths. They leveled mountains. They created ports. They built railroads that spanned continents. Alfred established factories in more than 20 countries: France, Germany, Spain, Russia, the United States. Money flowed like an unstoppable river. Patents, royalties, industrial empires. But there was a problem. Dynamite didn't just move mountains. It also moved armies. The world's militaries quickly realized that this revolutionary substance was perfect for killing on a massive scale. Artillery shells filled with dynamite could destroy fortifications that had stood for centuries. Landmines could blow entire battalions to bits. War, already horrific, became industrialized. Alfred Nobel tried to convince himself that this was a good thing. Yes, you read that right. Good. His logic was this: if weapons became sufficiently destructive, if every nation could annihilate any other with absolute ease, then no one would dare start a war. The balance of terror would bring lasting peace. My factories, he once said, can end wars before 1,000 peace treaties. The day 2 armies can destroy each other in a second. All civilized nations will recoil in horror and disband their troops. It was a beautiful idea, noble, even it was also completely wrong. Wars didn't stop, they intensified, and every battle, every massacre, bore Nobel's name printed on the explosives that tore apart young bodies on distant battlefields. Pacifists began calling him the Merchant of Death. Newspapers ran cartoons showing him sitting on a throne of corpses. At social gatherings, people avoided him. There goes the man who makes millions off human misery, they whispered. Alfred immersed himself more deeply in his work. He developed new explosives, gelignite, ballastite, each one more powerful than the last, each one making his fortune more obscene. And every night, he walked home alone. For here is the truth about Alfred Nobel that few know: he was profoundly, painfully lonely. He never married, he never had children. He had a few relationships, but they all ended badly. The most significant was with an Austrian woman named Bertha von Suttner, who worked briefly as his secretary before marrying another man. Bertha would become one of the leaders of the global peace movement, and Alfred, the man who armed the world, never stopped writing her letters, longing for what might have been. He lived in hotels. He traveled constantly between his factories. He suffered from terrible migraines, chronic insomnia, and depression. He took nitroglycerin as a heart medication, the same substance that had killed his brother, now coursed through his veins. The irony was too perfect, too cruel. "My homes are where my work is," he once wrote, "and my work is everywhere and nowhere." And then that newspaper arrived in 1888, the premature obituary. The merchant of death is dead. No one knows exactly what went through Alfred Nobel's mind when he read his own obituary. He left no diary entry for that day, no letter describing his feelings, but we do know what he did next. He shut himself away. For weeks, he barely spoke to anyone, and when he finally emerged, he had made a decision that would astound the world. Alfred Nobel was 55 years old. His health was rapidly deteriorating. He knew he didn't have much time left, and he realized something fundamental. Death is not the end of your story. It's when others pick up the pen and write your ending for you, unless you write that ending first. For the next 8 years, Nobel secretly worked on what would become his final act of defiance against his own legacy. On November 27, 1896, alone in his hotel room in San Remo, Italy, Alfred Nobel died of a stroke. He was 63 years old. And then, his will was opened. The world gasped. Alfred Nobel, one of the richest men on the planet, had left 94% of his fortune, more than 31 million Swedish kronor, an absolutely obscene sum for the time, to create a fund. The interest from that fund would be distributed each year in 5 prizes for those who had conferred the greatest benefit to mankind. In physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace. Peace. The man who had armed the world. The merchant of death. The inventor of dynamite. He dedicated his fortune to rewarding peacemakers. His family was furious. They tried to contest the will. "It's diverting our assets to strangers," they argued. Governments got involved, wanting the money to stay in Sweden. It took 5 years of legal battles for Nobel's wishes to be fulfilled. But finally, in 1901, the first Nobel Prizes were awarded. And ever since, every December, the world pauses to honor people who do the exact opposite of what Alfred Nobel did with his life. People who heal instead of wound, who unite instead of divide, who build peace instead of instruments of war. It is the greatest act of moral alchemy in modern history, transforming guilt into hope, turning a fortune built on destruction into a monument to human creativity. But here is the question that haunts us. Did it work? Can a man truly buy his redemption? Can a will erase a lifetime of complicity and bloodshed? Dr. Robert Mark Friedman, a historian of science at the University of Oslo, puts it this way: Nobel understood something profound about legacy. It's not what you do, it's what people remember about what you did. And he literally bought the right to be remembered differently. Today, when we hear the name Nobel, we don't think of explosives. We think of Marie Curie, of Albert Einstein, of Martin Luther King Jr., of Malala Yousafzai. We think of the best that humanity can be. Dynamite still exists. Of course, it's still used in wars. Nobel's inventions still kill, but they have been overshadowed, erased from the collective memory by the brilliance of that prize. Alfred Nobel, in his death, achieved something he never could in life. He completely reinvented himself. But the story doesn't end there, because Nobel's legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How many of us live with similar contradictions? How many of us create things that improve the world in one way while harming it in another? How many technology developers today are in the same position Nobel was in, creating powerful tools without fully understanding how they will be used? Artificial intelligence, social media, genetic engineering. Every technological advance carries within it the seeds of both creation and destruction. Bertha von Suttner, the woman he loved who became a peace activist, finally won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1905. She was the first woman to receive it. When she took the stage in Oslo, she spoke directly about her former employer and nearly. Alfred Nobel was an idealist, she said. He believed that science would save humanity. And he was right, but not in the way he thought. It didn't save us by making war so horrific that no one would dare fight it. It saved us by leaving behind an annual reminder that we must choose something better. That is Alfred Nobel's ultimate paradox. His greatest invention wasn't dynamite. It was the idea that no legacy is set in stone, that until the very last moment, we can choose what we leave behind. In his later years, Nobel wrote a play that was never published during his lifetime. It was called Nemesis, and was about a woman who sold her soul for revenge, only to discover that revenge was poison. Nobel's family burned all the copies after his death, ashamed of its content. Only one copy survived, discovered decades later. Was that play autobiographical? Was Nobel writing about himself, about the price he paid for arming the world? We will never know. But we know this: every December, when Nobel laureates go up to receive their medals in Stockholm and Oslo, they wear a small image of Alfred Nobel, his face engraved in gold. The man he was, the man he tried to be. And somewhere, in that gesture, there is a lesson for us all. Alfred Nobel died alone in a hotel room, whispering in Swedish, a language his Italian maid couldn't understand. His last words were lost forever, but his final actions still resonate. Each year, the prizes that bear his name award around $1 million to people who dedicate their lives to making the world a better place. To date, more than 600 people have received them: doctors who eradicated diseases, physicists who unlocked the secrets of the universe, writers who gave voice to the voiceless, leaders who risked everything for peace. Is that enough to tip the scales? Can 125 years of prizes compensate for the millions who died from explosives bearing the Nobel mark? There is no right answer. Only a beautiful and terrible tension that reminds us that humans are capable of both unimaginable horror and extraordinary redemption. Sometimes in the same lifetime, sometimes in the same heart. The next time you hear about the Nobel Prize, remember the man behind the name. He wasn't a saint. He was a broken man who tried to repair what he had broken. And in that attempt, he gave us something more valuable than any explosive: proof that it's never too late to change your story. Now, I ask you, what are you building? What legacy are you creating, consciously or unconsciously, with your daily actions, your work, your choices? You don't need to be a millionaire to leave a mark. You don't need to wait until you read your own obituary to wonder how you'll be remembered. Start today. Ask yourself, if your life ended tomorrow, what would people say about you? And more importantly, what can you do today to change that answer? Alfred Nobel taught us that regret can be a powerful fuel, but prevention is better than redemption. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. Don't assume you'll have time later. Build your legacy now, with intention, with purpose, with the awareness that every action is a vote for the world you want to leave behind. Because in the end, it's not about how much money you have or how many awards bear your name. It's about whether, when all is said and done, the world was a little better because you were here. That's the only question that matters, and only you can answer it.